Hello, class. So today we're at Riverside Cemetery, which is the oldest cemetery in Denver. Yes, yes. And so we're here to talk about Jeremy Taylor's The Art of Dying, or Holy Dying, actually. So, Holy Dying is picking up from a tradition known as the Art of Dying, which is a medieval tradition starting sometime in the 15th century. And the Ars Moriendi is basically a publication that became this way of accessing people who did not have direct access to the clergy. They could use a pamphlet in order to guide them toward a good death as they were dying on their deathbed. Okay, and so the Ars Moriendi started in Europe in the 15th century and had many different authors. And there's a famous woodcut version of the Ars Moriendi. I think that was published in Germany as well. That's rather interesting to look at. So this is a tradition that Jeremy Taylor is picking up off of while he's working in the 17th century Stuart England. Okay, and so this tradition, though, is generally, like I say, think of it as like a publication or like a self-help manual before you die that helped people overcome temptations that were problematic as you were dying. So in other words, you could lose faith on the deathbed. You could have despair, impatience. You could be suffering from the temptations of pride, also avarice. And then the Ars Moriendi is helping you understand the problem of these temptations and to pull you out of them in order to get to faith, hope, love, humility, and letting go. Okay, in letting go as a way to set your soul up to be more virtuous, to ensure a place in heaven. So this is the Ars Moriendi tradition. Ars Moriendi in Latin means art of dying. Okay, and Jeremy Taylor's picking up off of this, and he is also working more in the Protestant tradition. So he is an Anglican. So he is one of the forefathers of the Church of England in the Anglican Communion. So he is known for his theological work because he was a chaplain to, I believe, it was either Charles I or Charles II, and he also was working under the Earl of Carbery, as he mentions in the dedication that I'm having you look at. So the Earl of Carbery, while he was working during the time of Cromwell, so in between Charles I, there was Cromwell, and then we had the Restoration with Charles II. While he was working as chaplain with the Earl of Carbery, that's where he wrote The Art of Dying in 1651, and that was a sequel to The Art of Living. So The Art of Living was to get good with God while you were living. The Art of Dying is to get your soul toward being more virtuous before you die. Okay, and we're going to see this also includes while you're living. Okay, so this was a dedication to Richard Lord Vaughan, Earl of Carbery's death of his wife, and also Jeremy Taylor's wife had just passed away as well. Okay, and oddly enough, he doesn't mention that. That's something like this day and age we would talk about, right? But oddly enough, he doesn't mention this in the book. But yes, so he's facing death, and he also knows that his patron is facing the death of his wife. Okay, and so he also mentions in the dedication that some of the main points that we want to focus on. That, in other words, the deathbed. So in the Catholic tradition of Ars Moriendi, someone might be referring to the Ars Moriendi before it's too late, or when it's too late. Excuse me. So in other words, your deathbed might be too late. You might be so distracted with the problems that you're having and the sufferings you have while you're dying that you could lose your chance. You could lose the chance to get your soul right. So what Jeremy Taylor's trying to impress on us is that youth, and when we're able and when we're of sound mind and body, is really when we want to get good and get our virtue set so that we could ensure a better place in heaven. So always remember that when we're thinking of virtue, we're setting ourselves up in a way to think of practice. So how is it that I am practicing in the world? How am I in the world, not only with myself, but also with other people in my world, right? Because you can't be a virtuous person only with yourself. You are a virtuous person within a community as well, right? And in this case, a community of believers. So in other words, the deathbed is only a school of severe exercise where we might lose our chance, if we're not of mind and body, to have the discipline to start exercising the virtues while we are living, right? And so old age is also a time that we might have problems with getting straight, because we'll have the sins of pride and avarice and willfulness and unwillingness to learn, as Jeremy Taylor points out. So perhaps the deathbed is too late, right? And so in the dedication, he also brings up the point that he's differing with in terms of so-called extreme unction. And so that's basically a way that the Catholics, the Church of Rome, thought that you could help the dead on their deathbed by getting them good with God, simply by anointing them. And so Jeremy Taylor's calling this into question, saying that no, we need to get set with our virtue while we're living, right? And so that's his point, that anointing someone right before they're dying seems like it's too late, basically, right? And so I'm also I have you read the dedication in the Holy Dying. Have you read the dedication, and I also have you looking at section 1, right, for the rules and exercises of Holy Dying. And so section 1 is titled The Consideration of Vanity and the Shortness of Man's Life. And so in section 1, I urge you to ask yourself, what is it that he's pointing to as far as vanity? And likewise, what is rational in what he's pointing out, okay? So in other words, not only what is rational, but also what is ethical, okay? So what is vanity, what is rational, what is ethical, right? And so we get right away this sense that the vanity is not quite how we might think of it, and it's more getting us set on the ephemerality of life. So this section opens with these passages on bubbles, having no other business in the world but to be able to die, right? And so also he compares our life to a vapor that's not substantial enough to be a cloud. So he has these beautiful prose passages which are almost like poetry, really. And so that's part of the reason why we're still talking about Jeremy Taylor today, is because of his beautiful writing. And so this is in English, and it also is part of the reason why he's set as a forefather of the Church of England, right? And so always remember that writing this is for him, the Holy Dying, is a consideration to be help us with the necessity of many purposes of wisdom, to see how time brings death, right? So therein, if we're thinking of a rational component, we're seeing that time there and the passage of time as necessary to help us recognize life's ephemeral nature. It's like a bubble or a vapor, or like smoke perhaps, that rises up to its foster father, the sun, as Jeremy Taylor has it. So every day's necessity calls for a reminder that portion which death fed on all night. So, in other words, for Jeremy Taylor, death is all around us, and the reminders of it are everywhere. We might not be able to key into that as contemporary readers so much because we push death away. And so in 17th century England, I think that death was a little more to the forefront than we have death today, where we push it away. So, in other words, we have examples of death entering into people's lives at all doors. It comes in many different ways, and we never know. And this way that we never know how death will come should urge us to start getting good with our virtue toward death while we are able, right? So in other words, for Jeremy Taylor, the practice of becoming virtuous was really a daily event. So in other words, he urged his believers to practice every day. So he believed in assiduous practice to get yourself virtuous, and it's a lot of hard work to get good with God, basically. So the nature of time calls us to meditate on death by those things which are instruments that are instruments of acting it. So in other words, there's a multiple number of ways in which we could encounter death, and so we should always recognize that time is a way in which we could at least understand that it's going by quickly, it's ephemeral. Recognize this in order to help yourself become more virtuous, is what he's trying to get us to recognize as a means of stepping out of this vanity, perhaps, that we're not able to recognize life's ephemeral nature, right? We're not able to recognize that death comes in at many doors, right? And so a man is so vain, so unfixed, so perishing a creature that he cannot long last in the scene of fancy. So in other words, we can't last long in the way that we have the ephemeral nature of goodness. We always must understand that we have to strive in practice to become good, ethical people, right? We don't just remain there. We have to constantly strive toward that. This is the work of becoming virtuous. It's, as we point out in Introduction to Philosophy, ethics is often understood as the practical philosophy, and in that sense, this is how we should understand what Jeremy Taylor is helping us do, is recognize that we don't have that much time, and so now is the time to become virtuous while we're able, right? So a man goes off and is forgotten the life that is a dream, and life is like a dream of a distracted person. So in other words, we need to get good with understanding that we have to contrast the vanity of thinking that we have a lot of time and more focus on our virtue, I think is a good point to stop here, and we'll take it from there. So thank you, class.